Welcome everybody to this event. So my name is Donna Gartland. I'll be hosting the event today. I'm from Codema. We are the Dublin Energy Agency, and this event is part of the Dublin Climate Action Week. And we're very happy to have you here with us for this event, which is the Women in Energy event. And that is a collaboration between Renewable Energy Ireland, SEAI, and ourselves at Codema. Just to mention that this is part of Dublin Climate Action Week, which is part of a wider organisational group between the 4 Dublin local authorities and the Dublin Climate Action Regional Office. So it's part of a lot. We've come towards the end of a very long week of events now, and I hope you've had a chance to look at the other great lineup of other events that are on this week. So just to say, first off, and before I forget towards the end, a big thank you to SEAI and Renewable Energy Ireland. So Julie Farrelly and Patricia Comsky from SEAI and Justin Moran from Renewable Energy Ireland for helping us to organise this event, and the Women in Energy Ireland group. And thanks to Tanya's predecessor at Renewable Energy Ireland, Mary Donnelly, who would have set up the Women in Energy directory while she was there. And thanks again to the colleagues at Codema at the background, Katie Harrington, who's doing all the tech magic in the background and helping us to organise the event. It's been a great, we've had so many registrations. This is actually the most popular event on the Climate Action Week calendar. So it's great to see the interest. We've had over 260 people registered, and a big shout out to the 7 men that have registered as well. So this is good to see that it's not just an event targeted at women. Just let everybody know that this event is being recorded, and if you are tweeting about the event, if you could please use the hashtag that you see on the screen there, DCAW21. While we're going through the event, please do send in any questions you have for our guests in the Q&A box. So if you could please keep questions to the Q&A box and any comments to the chat box. That will make it much easier for us to go through later on and decipher questions from comments. And there is an upvoting thing you can do on the questions and answers, where if there is a question that you'd really like to see answered first, if you could upvote that question, we'll make sure that we try and answer as many as possible. Obviously, with 200 odd participants, it's going to be hard to get to maybe all of the questions. But I think that's all the housekeeping that I have to do. So without further ado, I'll introduce our 2 speakers, and a big thank you to both of them for joining us today. So first I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Tanya Harrington, who's chairperson of Renewable Energy Ireland. And Tanya currently works for An Post as their Chief Regulatory Affairs Officer. And she's previously also worked as a special advisor on energy issues in what was then called the Department of Communications, Marine and Natural Resources, and was also head of energy policy with Ibec. So very big welcome to you, Tanya. And then Ellie Horwitch-Smith. So Ellie has been working in the sustainable energy sector for a long time, so over 18 years now, with particular expertise in heat networks and low carbon housing. So as well as this, she's founded and managed her own business, Energy Harmonics. She is a board member of the Sustainable Housing Action Partnership and member of the very successful district heating Divas group in the UK, which we're hoping to hear more about this afternoon. And she has recently been appointed Assistant Director to the Birmingham's Route to Zero Carbon at the City Council there. So I got that right, Ellie, didn't I? Yes. Yes, that's it. Yes, because that's a new appointment. So I wanted to make sure I get that right. And so you're obviously working on bringing Birmingham to a zero carbon area. So very interesting. It's obviously 2 very interesting speakers. And I know we'll have a lot to talk about today. So I'm going to jump straight in then. And maybe Tanya, I might start with yourself then. Maybe if you just give us a bit of background into your career path, where you started off as, maybe what you studied in school, for example, and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, well, first of all, Donna, thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. And Ellie, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'd like to also thank SEAI and Codema for sponsoring the event and for inviting me to speak. So it's my pleasure to be here. I suppose when I look back over my career to date, starting out at the heart of why I am where I am is primarily a love of interest and a deep interest in history. So I had an amazing history teacher, two in fact, in secondary school, John Dowling and Deirdre Gogarty, and both of them inspired in me a complete passion for the subject. And what you might think, well, how does that get you to be a Chief Regulatory Affairs Officer with one of Ireland's largest semi-states? The link isn't immediately obvious, but actually the discipline and training that comes with it is, and it also, the perspective that a student of history will understand is you get to learn the longevity, the epochs of events, the fact that things have a permanency and a change attributed to them. And so I went on to study history and German in university in UCD. And through that, what really became of interest to me was the work of statecraft. And of course, policy is statecraft. It is how states interact with each other and craft their space in the world. And at the time, my particular area of interest was around security and defence policy. So I went to pursue my master's, and I deliberately chose Belfast in 1996. This was pre-Good Friday Agreement, because I really wanted to understand, and was provoked by a question asked of me of a friend when I was on my Erasmus year in Germany, and he said, "Oh, do many bombs go off in Dublin?" And I was like, "No, I live in Dublin. That's a whole 150 miles away. What are you talking about?" And clearly, you know, when I was answering the question, as a student of history and politics effectively, what I was hearing myself say was, that makes absolutely no sense. That's such a ridiculous answer. And you need to understand why people your age now still feel like they want to persist with this sort of, you know, the continued strife that was up there. So I actually moved up to Belfast and embedded myself there. I can't say I know it intimately, but I did live there for a year and a half, and I've gone back since to study. So I really want to.
You didn't adopt the accent anyway, Tanya.
Not at all. No. I can do it, but it's really bad. So I won't do the impression. But anyway, kind of long story short. So kind of quickly moving on. I was up there. And actually, this kind of comes to a bit of the female, you know, question in a male-dominated world, but in security and defence policy, it's all military. And so one of the first events I was asked to go down to attend to speak at on behalf of Queen's was an event at the IIEA with the Finnish foreign minister, who at the time there was a whole new evolution in the security and defence architecture in Europe. And I remember walking into that event. It was a very sunny June day, and I was in a pale pink dress suit, and she was in a lemon dress suit. And we were the only two women in a room of dark suits. So there was about 150 men, and there was she and I. And it struck me, where are the women? Yeah. I didn't even, I was like, where are all the women? Why are there no women in this room? And so kind of my entree into kind of male-dominated professional circles, it started as young as my exit from college. I won't go into all the details, but I then went on to work I did some lecturing with Boston University. I went into Ibec, and I ended up heading up their energy policy unit. Again, sort of spent time at the European Commission, really understood how policy is made and how legislation gets made, how regulations get made. And I suppose really became passionate about a number of things: the energy sector, reform in the energy sector, which at the time was very dominated and by a single state entity. There was a need for competition, a need to a transfer to renewables, a shift to renewables, and tackling the climate agenda. And so I worked with the then minister for 2 years to prepare Ireland's first white paper with the officials, obviously on energy in 2005. 2007, which was launched by the then Taoiseach in March 2007. I then had the opportunity to go with him to transport in the next government formation, and that also gave me an exposure to some of the issues and the requirements around decarbonising transport. So I suppose all of that then led me into a kind of some into the climate action space. I went to establish NTR Foundation for NTR PLC, which is their corporate foundation to basically promote activities and investment in philanthropic projects tackling climate change and resource constraints. And that was launched in New York in 2010 with President Clinton. It was a really brilliant event. And then we also got to get funding out independently, and it still exists today. And the dividend from the shares is funding that organization. I then went and I did my PhD in regulatory governance, back again to Queen's as a student, and also sort of consulting work through London, working again in the regulatory sphere. And I joined An Post in 2019 as Chief Regulatory Affairs Officer, and I was invited to take up the chair of Renewable Energy Ireland just in April this year. So I suppose that's my career journey and so far, and sort of what prompted it was, I suppose, a passion about understanding history, which led me to a real passion around policy and statecraft, which there's so many policy areas you could get involved in, but I'm particularly interested in economic policy and regulation.
That's a great story. And I mean, it's great to hear how, you know, you didn't have to come from a technical background or a very energy, you know, dominated like, you know, your academic background or your experience wasn't originally in energy or anything technical, and you were able to transfer your skills over to the energy sector. And I think that's, you know, something that maybe people could take away from this, is that, you know, it doesn't matter what you did at school or what you did at university necessarily. Like, you know, those skills, there's so many transferable skills. I think maybe that's a way of maybe getting more women into the sector as well, is because, you know, it's not all engineering as well. Like, you know.
Yes. Yeah. No, but not by any means. So, you know, and it is obviously, because it's physical infrastructure, it has to be dominated by engineers who understand how infrastructure works, and how the systems architectures and the IT systems that support that work. But what I have found in my career is the greater the diversity around the thought processes and decision making and the decisions to allocate capital, they are best informed when there's a broad diversity to the thinking.
Yeah.
And actually that's true for politics, it's true for business, it's true for academia. And one of the things, if I might digress just a little bit into studying, you know, doing my PhD, that's a whole other kind of chapter in life, but it took 5 years. I had 3 small children. I was consulting as well, working in a really demanding consulting practice in London. And I suppose, you know, like for me, it's just, it's important to stay true to what's like valuable to you in that period. And I think to just focus on what you want to deliver, and not be too swayed by what's going on around you, just to stick to your guns and like row your own boat. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks for that, Tanya. That's a lovely insight into a lot of things I didn't know about you at all. So that's great. So maybe Ellie, will come to you and maybe start, because obviously you're working in the UK, so maybe a lot of people on the call might be familiar with you. So yeah, a bit of introduction to yourself, your background, and how you come to be where you are today.
Yeah, of course. And again, kind of very much kind of echo the thanks for asking me to join you today. So yes, I would say there's a number of things that I would echo that kind of Tanya's mentioned in terms of the opportunities here that hopefully will kind of enthuse people to kind of retain in the sector. But I've come at it from a very well, not a traditional background at all. I'm not an engineer. I'm not in finance. I'm actually, I have invented myself somewhat and invented the opportunities that I have been involved in, which has been a really interesting process to be through. But I came at it, and I guess my passion, particularly for being in the energy industry, started at university for me. So I actually went to study criminology and psychology at university, so something totally very different. I did continue to study psychology, but alongside that, the university I went to offered a dual honours programme. I took up one in the environmental side. It was not the environmental sciences, but the environmental side of things. And I was hugely inspired by a chap called Professor Paul Eakin, who was a guest lecturer for a couple of the modules I studied in my second and third years. And he was a policy advisor to government. He'd advised on the Kyoto Protocol. He was advising on a number of key things that government in the UK was starting to look to implement. And I could see the kind of reality and practice of being in a sector which was fundamentally trying to do a kind of environmental and social good. And that, for me, that really accorded as something I wanted to be part of. So that's kind of how I initially discovered my love. I will say, and for those who are not of a similar age, you might not recall, but there was a very famous activist with Greenpeace called Swampy back in the 80s and 90s. And because I had an interest in the environment as a young child, I always used to get called Swampy by my friends, but that's a bit of an aside. But yeah, so effectively, I mean, when I started out my career in 2002, there was very, very little by way of opportunity out there in the environmental space. If you were an engineer, you'd be fine. If you were in the kind of sciences, that was fine. But for me, I didn't sit into any natural category. And I think that has both been a blessing and also a bit of a curse at times, because it's been difficult to articulate to somebody what it is I do. And even now, many of the people that I know and love dearly still find it difficult to describe what my job is. And in some respects I do sometimes too, because it is quite evolving all the time.
Yeah. If it's any comfort, Ellie, my best friends just call me Chandler, because they're like, we don't know what she does. Don't understand it, don't know what she does. Yeah.
And I think isn't that interesting in its own respect, that actually the activity, the work that kind of those of us working in the sector, in whichever discipline or dimension you're coming from, it's so unfamiliar in terms of something that people have that kind of have any experience of, that perhaps that actually in its own right is something that we need to listen to make it more part of everyday life for everybody. But yeah, I mean, I discovered very early on that actually the regulatory environment wasn't one for me, actually. So I've come in a very different dynamic. I worked at the Environment Agency, which I think you have obviously an equivalent for in Ireland as well. And I think I wanted the opportunity to kind of create and invent. I think the thing that I'm driven by is problem solving. So I love to solve a problem. I love to have a challenge and go, right, how can I utilize my knowledge to work a way around that? And that's very much been a theme in the work that I've done. So I've always worked in the consultancy sector until the most recent post, which I haven't yet started, which will be working in the actual public sector. But I've always worked with public authorities, because for many, many years, and I think times are changing, they've been the only kind of real interested from a social and environmental kind of good perspective body in this sector. And obviously that might be all sorts of different public organisations, but they really have trailblazed and championed a lot of it. And unfortunately, a lot of that expertise over the years has been lost, because it hasn't been top priority for many others. And I think that is starting to change. But so it's always been quite a challenge to demonstrate the value of why to do something that isn't required by law, or isn't necessarily going to save you money, or it'll save someone else money. But I think that's been almost the challenge for me in actually supporting the clients that I work with. So I effectively started working on government funded programs, and I was really fortunate that actually the company I started working with, which is a small kind of SME of around about 20 people, they actually very much gave me the freedom to create and invent what I wanted to do. And because it was a small company, I got involved in absolutely everything from business development and business planning to marketing to setting up a consultancy business with that organization to office setup. I mean, literally it covered a whole range of things. And I would say to anybody who's kind of listening, particularly early in your career, do try and work with a range of sizes of organizations, because I think it really gives you a different perspective into the nuts and bolts of how these organizations work. And I think that for me was really enthusing. And I think because they had confidence in me, it created confidence in myself. And I think for me, I've as I say, I've kind of not followed a traditional path. There has been no traditional path. And I think that for me and my personality has worked very, very well, because I've wanted to problem solve. I've wanted to identify challenges and try and identify a way of tackling it. So I found myself in the district heating sector over the last 5 years, bringing my project and kind of collaboration skills together. And I'd very much kind of echo what you were saying earlier, Tanya, about you need different voices around the table, because you can have a kind of challenge to overcome. There is often a traditional route to doing it, but often if you bring different dimensions to the table, all of a sudden new ideas or new ways of looking at the same problem all of a sudden emerge. And I think that's something that I'm very much passionate about, is actually collaboration and bringing those individuals together. So it's kind of just a little kind of touching on kind of where I've come from and what really drives me. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting and exciting time, kind of having been over the last 18 years or so, trying to get anyone to do anything outside of the norm, to now it being, how can we make this happen quicker and at bigger scale? It's turning from that to the scale that's going to be our biggest next challenge. But I think it's a fantastic time to get into the sector. Really, really do.
Very true.
Yeah,
very
definitely.
True.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time. I mean, there's no end of opportunities now, really, which is great. I think we're all fighting over staff at the moment here in Ireland, you know, trying to get people in. And I think, yeah, definitely I would feel and you know, have similar experiences working with, I suppose, as you say, small organizations where, you know, if you are in an SME, you kind of get to jump in at different, you know, all different kind of areas and different levels, you know, and you kind of get to see how projects progress from right from the very beginning to the end. And I mean, it's nice to kind of have that the advantage, I suppose, in a smaller company, as well as actually, you know, seeing how things work at a larger scale as well. But it was, some things that are picking up from your conversation. There's no advantage, like I suppose you found an advantage in having no traditional path way to where you are now, and that was really interesting. And we found out, you know, that Chandler and Swampy are your nicknames as well, which is you'll have to change your Twitter handles now to Chandler and Swampy after this event. So I suppose one of the questions, or something that I think is quite interesting, it's just something I read recently, was around how, you know, we kind of change and adapt our behaviors depending on our environments. And I suppose there's been studies that show women actually lower their voices if they want to, you know, show some kind of an authority or dominance in a situation or in a boardroom or in a meeting. And I suppose particularly in rooms full of where there be more men and kind of those lower, deeper tones, and you want to kind of put yourself at the same level. And it's interesting. And I suppose, have you ever found yourself adapting your own behaviors to kind of fit into this kind of more male dominated environment? I'm going to go with Tanya first.
Okay. I suppose I'll tell you a story first, and then I'll give you my perspective. So when I first went into Ibec, one of the first events that I was invited to was, they used to call it the Oil Barons Ball, but it was the Institute of Academics, the Institute of Engineers annual event. It was held in the Burlington every year in early November. And myself, and to this day, I could ring up any one of the 5 women that were there. But I walked into a room with a black dress on, because it was black tie, all the men were in black tie, and I had this really bright blue scarf on just around my shoulders. And I walked in, and it was a bit like the finish event, you know, I literally couldn't see any color. There was just about 300 men in black tie, all very gentlemanly, practically smoking cigars with Stetsons, and then invited to the table. And when I got up to go to the bathroom, they all stood up. And I was like, what is going on here, right? So, and I kind of walked out going, this is so bizarre. It's so bizarre. They're so nice, but it's so bizarre that I'm the only woman in this room, or one of 5. And there was kind of an unspoken thing with the women who were there that were like, hi, you know, we'll stick together, as small as this is. And that was 20 odd years ago. And I'm happy to say, at the last time I attended that event, it was nearly kind of 1/3 women, 2/3 men, which I think shows the diversity. Look, first of all, we're here because we're in business, or in academia or whatever, but we're applying our professional selves to this, and our energies to this space. So the markets have evolved, and governments have evolved to require a wider set of skills. Some are more ahead of others in prioritizing diversity and inclusion in their thinking and their decision making. And I think that that's now reflected, but it's still not enough. And I think for me, I've had a very interesting journey in the sense that I never was involved in women networks, even though I was in a very male dominated sector. I kind of honestly didn't prioritize it, and I didn't devote time to it. I devoted time to my craft. So I devoted time to getting really, really, really as good as I could be at what I do, knowing my business really well, and almost ignoring gender, right? So I just, it was so overwhelming, the maleness, that I just was like, I'm just going to ignore this because I can't even give that attention. So I'm just going to focus on the words that are coming out of my mouth and out of that person's mouth to make decisions to improve where we are. And I think that helped me a lot to kind of cope with the maleness of government, the maleness of energy, the maleness. The other thing, and I lost my train of thought a little bit on the academic point, but academia was a fantastic sojourn for me, because what was really impactful was nobody cared about whether I was a man or a woman or whatever. They only cared about what I thought. And they only cared about what I thought, not in my opinion, but in my argument, which had to be data-driven and evidenced. And I could only do that by doing the work it takes to get a PhD. And that takes an awful lot of work, and it takes an awful lot of dedication. But what I really enjoyed about it, which I don't think men or women, certainly women, aren't afforded, the kind of blindness to gender that we should be. And I would just reference two things here. You know, one tiny 15-minute program on Netflix, if you're sitting down tonight with a glass of wine to celebrate the end of Climate Week, it's called Explained, and it's in the first series of Explained. And there's a kind of a short section, a short program on the pay gap, okay, the gender pay gap. And in that, it describes two instances where it's narrowest in societies. And the two instances struck me as quite shocking, because they were totally unexpected. Okay, the first is Iceland, and the second is Rwanda. And the reasons are as follows. In Iceland, all the women, and in the sort of late 80s, 90s, I might have my dates slightly wrong here, but they were so frustrated in society at, you know, their expectation around participation in workforce and home and so forth, that they all decided that they'd go out at midday on a certain day and just stop. So whether they were in ERs, at home, in offices, nursing, in coffee shops, in restaurants, they would just stand outside of their workplace or home and stop. And the consequence was that Iceland passed the first legislation around paternal care, which was to divide care around time around caring to be non-gender specific.
Yes.
And actually compulsory for both parents for periods of time in the early part of the child's life.
Yeah.
The second case, and I looked up that piece of legislation because I'm a legislative wonk, and I was like, can we just get a harp on that? Can we just transpose that into domestic legislation here? And the second area was Rwanda. And the reason why women were so dominant in Rwandan decision-making and in society was because the civil war had actually, a lot of the men had died. So they actually, in order to get hospitals working and schools functioning, women had to actually just become judges and teachers and so forth. And I think that there's just a lot to be learned about those two examples. And that little 15-minuter is a really good it's a really good sort of 15 minutes for a glass of wine. I've gone on too far and probably covered too much. But
no, that's great. I suppose it's definitely one of the things that, you know, one of my own peeves is around that parental leave issue, because I think it's not just an issue for you know, for women, but for men as well. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It'll only help both sides.
Well, I can see a lot of questions coming in on the family kids thing. So can I tackle that just up front? If you'll indulge me, I'll just cover this quickly. Yeah. There's two authors. One utterly frustrates me, and the other kind of gave me some psychological comfort. The first was the Lean In book, you know, Sheryl Sandberg's book, and it's all handed out like, oh, lean in, lean in. Lean in if you have, you know, a driver and a chef and a life of privilege and childcare in the home and, you know, so forth. Lean in if all of those supports are there for you. Okay, now some of it is valuable, and I don't discount a lot of it, which is, I've seen it in many rooms. Women walk into rooms, they don't sit at the table. They don't automatically just sit at the table. If you're in the room, you're at the meeting, sit at the table. And so there's some of her recommendations that I would take on board. Many, I just think, require a life that isn't afforded to those except the exceptional 1%, okay? So the other person that I'm much more drawn to is Anne-Marie Slaughter, and she served in Obama's administration. She's an academic. She has a book called Unfinished Business. She's a lawyer and academic, published in 2015. She also has a TED Talk. So one of the things she says is, we can't look at life as this constant tilting in, like if we're not leaning in, we're not present. Rather, you look at life as a continuum of caring. So, and you put the people who need to be cared for at the center of society. So they are vulnerable people. They are children and elderly, or those who are sick. And in our lifetime, we will all experience a caring requirement, whether that's for our children, for ourselves, our spouses, or our family, or our parents. And her thesis is, throughout your career, there are periods where you can lean in, and there are periods where you need to lean out.
Yeah.
And you need to make those decisions for yourself and own the consequences, but society should support that.
Yeah.
As well. So
allowing you to say no to things, you know what I mean? I think we always feel a pressure to say yes to everything, every opportunity. I suppose you think, oh, I have to grab that now, and if I say no, you know what I mean, this will be gone and I'll never get anywhere, you know. And it's slowing down. And that just reminds you of, before I go to you, Ellie, just 2 books as well. While we're on a book club, we should probably start a book blog. But there's one called Slow at Work by Aoife McEwen, that she has it on audiobook as well. I find audiobooks great because it actually lets you do hands-free things, like pick up things and clean things and do things at the same time. And another book called Burnout that was recommended to me by a guy in UCC. It's by 2 sisters, Emily Nagoski and her sister Amelia Nagoski. They're both very good, both on audiobook as well. So just help.
They have a TED Talk. I've watched their TED Talk.
Yeah, exactly. And Ellie, I suppose then, you know, in your experience then, do you feel, you know, similar situations to Tanya, like, you know, have you had to adapt your behaviors anyway? Have you felt you've had to change or do anything? Like, I suppose when Tanya was talking there, what I thought about was, you know, having to work any harder. You know, a lot of the things that you were saying, Tanya, were like, you know, you had to have that back, you had to go, you know, not that you had to, but you felt like you needed to go and get that PhD to have those arguments. And, you know, there's just in the poll later on, some of the questions, when the responses is around that, do you feel women need to work harder? And Eddie, then from your experience, like, do you feel this, does that resonate with you as well?
Yes and no. I would say that I've actually had quite a positive experience throughout my career, and I don't know whether that's luck or whether it's just the nature of the people with whom I've worked. A lot of people have been, I would say I've walked into a room and been similarly on the kind of same ratios of men to women, maybe not 2 to several hundred, but certainly been in the kind of minority. But as I say, for me, that kind of early part of my career was spent working predominantly with public sector, where there is a larger proportion of men and women, probably not at the time, although it is changing at the more senior levels, but certainly there was no sense. I mean, there's some traditional sectors that you'd find more men and more women, but overall, I think there was quite a good gender balance in the organisations with whom I was working and offering services. And because I was coming in as a consultant, so someone was buying my time and my expertise, it does put somewhat a different spin on it as well. That said, and I don't know whether or not I can separate my own personal kind of need for this from whether or not I felt it was expected. I think there were some comments in the chat around kind of the time and effort and the passion that you bring to something. I'm really passionate about the work that I do and the difference that I want to try and make, and that is often kind of mentioned in relation to me talking to people about what I do. That said, in order to stand up in front of a group of people and talk to them, or to offer some service to them that I think is of value, I feel I've got to show that I'm bringing something. And I think there is an element of and I don't, whether it's a female trait, whether it's a personality trait in me, or whether or not it's the nature of the work that I'm doing. But as a consultant, I don't want to be one of those people who just rehashes the same old piece of work, charges the same amount for it, and then moves on, because actually there's no value brought to that. Some of the stuff may be similar, some of the issues and challenges may be similar, but for me, I want to spend the time and effort in actually understanding the organisation and understanding its nuts and bolts. And I think maybe it's not due to my involvement in lots of different parts of a company quite early on, but I do think there's an element of understanding how an organisation works in every kind of regard that does enable you to better see how change needs to be brought about. And I think that we can't forget that one of the fundamental things of this sector is it's going to be change. It's going to be organisational, institutional, regulatory change to make and enable what we need to achieve happen. And actually change management and people management is, I would say, something that is hugely vital to that process. And I think what you need to do is obviously ensure that people understand why certain kind of barriers exist. Is it about the way in which the organisation is structured, or is it about individuals, because individuals can be huge blockers in change as well. So I would say my overall experience, just trying to kind of keep to the point, is reasonably positive actually. What I found very enlightening quite early on is I was in a big kind of global consultancy practice for a number of years, and they put me forward for a leadership program specifically for women. And what I hadn't quite appreciated is how much the language, and well, you mentioned earlier, obviously, the pitch of voice or how we convey ourselves can often be to our detriment, with no real basis for it. So, for example, you might have in a promotional context, you may have one person, and they were obviously talking about males versus females in terms of tendencies. The male may be very happy to stand up and go, I've achieved this, I've done that. It's all about look what I do. A woman will be quite often, and not all the time, but quite often more likely to identify and things that perhaps they need to work on and improve, rather than articulate, do you know what? Big on me, I did a great job on this. And I think that's something that I've always kept in the back of my mind as a make sure I'm not over kind of egging what I do, because I don't also want to be in that camp, but that I'm articulating and demonstrating my capability and articulating that to the people who need to know it. And I think that I can't remember the references they gave. It was a long time ago that I was on that, but it really did stick with me. It really did stick with me. And I'm very also lucky, I would say, to have a lot of friends, female, who set up their own businesses really early. And I remember thinking, crikey, I could never do that. But actually, do you know what? It felt right, it happened, and it's been great. So it's about the people around you, clearly, who you find inspiring. And I think if you don't have people around you who kind of represent perhaps what you want to achieve, it's the reading material that you love. You find inspiration elsewhere. But I think it's about how you articulate and present yourself as well as everything else.
I think it probably answers a good few of the questions that have come in actually now, Ellie. I think you've answered a good few. So a lot of the questions coming in are around what can we do, I suppose, to change things? What can we do to support women coming into the energy sector? What can we do to encourage companies working in the energy sector to, and I suppose it's, it comes back to that change management where you're talking about understanding the barriers and going through actually, formulating a plan of how to tackle those. Things like leadership programs that you mentioned, networks. I suppose this network here will hopefully, people will find other women that are that inspiration for them, and maybe this particular group can be that for them. And I think there's a few. I think those kind of things will help to answer those. I don't know if there's anything else there you would think.
I mean, can I, Donna, just add to what Ellie has said there? I'm very kind of, I wholeheartedly agree with her. I think that I would say that there's, for me in my career, and I've also had a very positive experience, like a very positive experience throughout my career, a number of men played a very important role in that. And I think it's important that we find our champions and that we champion others. And I'm kind of gender neutral on that, but it's if you have a champion who happens to be a man, who happens to be in a senior decision-making role, like they're there, use that opportunity to get yourself opportunities. The other thing I would say is just always remember, in business, you're in business. It's not a social club. The senior decision makers really are focused on profit and profitability and sustainability of their businesses. So understand, something that I've kind of learned is understand what the layer above you is responsible for. What are their pain points on a daily basis? What are they expected to deliver? So when you understand what drives them and their thinking, and you can feed that really helps you have a conversation of business rather than of need. And I think that's also really important. The other last tip that I got from the amazing Paula de Perna, who was Jacques Cousteau's right-hand woman. She was on our advisory board at NTR PLC, a typical Democrat, typical New Yorker, very strident. And she said to me, Tanya, she said, I'm just going to say this to you once. She goes, stop apologizing, stop explaining. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Walking in the room going, sorry. Yeah.
So if if you've done something wrong, okay, you apologize and you own the mistake and you atone for it and you try to make it better. But starting conversations, a bit to Ellie's point, starting conversations in language that's, I'm sorry, but do you mind if but if you have a point of view, own it and contribute your thinking.
And on that point, I'm going to have to move on now. And I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm just going to move on. And I'm going to share my screen now, because we did send out a poll of some questions. I suppose some of the kind of similar to the questions that we've been discussing here to the wider audience. And I'm just going to share my screen to show the results of some of those. So apologies now. I have about 100 screens here, as you do. So I'm going to share this one. So the results were, you guys can let me know if you can see that okay, yeah. Perfect. So one of the questions we asked everybody was, why do you think there's such a kind of a big difference between the percentages of men and women working in the energy and the renewable energy sectors? So the overwhelming answers that came in were around the not encouraged at school level into technical and STEM careers, which is an interesting one, because I suppose both, Tanya and Ellie, both of you have had different career, that didn't necessarily go through that STEM. And neither did I, actually. I was doing art when I left school. So I suppose it's, that's an interesting one. And maybe the roles that we've ended up in are less maybe technical, or maybe the route, if you don't go through a traditional pathway, may lead you in a certain type of job in the energy sector, but maybe not less. I suppose there seems to be a lower percentage in the more technical roles, specifically, rather than the policy and the, communications and the other side. So maybe, yes, that might be a reason there. The can't see it, can't be it. So the women in the energy sector not visible. So that's a very interesting one. As that was the kind of second most popular answer, and that was that's a really interesting one. And I suppose again, it kind of supports maybe the women in energy directory that we've set up, and hopefully that would encourage. So anybody that's online now that hasn't heard of it, if you would please circulate and encourage anybody who's organising conferences or events, that really, there are a lot of women out there who have the expertise and who can speak at these events. I think we should really be encouraging that. I mean, it's clearly an issue, that people don't see. It's usually the same people that speak at these events in the energy sector in Ireland anyway, and it's generally the senior management who are generally men. So maybe that's something we can try and improve. Some of the other answers, yes, the kind of bro culture, this kind of Gulf buggy brigade that seems to happen in the energy sector. I had to ask some of the associations, they're having their outings and it's a golf thing, and I was like, oh great, so are there going to be lessons provided at the start? And I always wanted to put forward a spa day instead, just to see what they would say to that instead. But I suppose one of the responses to this was actually very interesting for me, was that this bro culture kind of a thing is actually at the undergraduate level as well. So, I suppose maybe that's not something we think about too often, but especially if you're very young, maybe, and less confident, and you're going into an undergraduate course, and you might be the only one, for me, that was my experience. I was the only the only female on my undergraduate degree in any of the years that I was there. So, you know, that might be, you know, something. How do we encourage, like, you're 17, 18 maybe, or whatever it is now, 19, 20, going into an engineering degree, and it's all full of, you know, young lads of that age. You know, it's probably not the most encouraging. So that's quite interesting to hear. So I suppose these are kind of things that we can take away as a group as well, and kind of concentrate some of our efforts on. The question of whether you think women have to work harder to get to the same position as men in the energy sector, there was a kind of an overwhelming kind of yes to this. Like, so 77% of respondents felt that they did have to work, or women did have to work harder to get to the same position in the energy sector, which is very interesting. I suppose then if you employ a woman, you know that they're going to be very, you know, that they're you know, they've got all their credentials and definitely, you know, very experienced. So I suppose there's positives to employing women in that way as well. Have you ever passed on going on a new role or promotion and regretted it? Now, this was kind of surprising that, you know, a third of people have. You know, you know, that's quite an interesting one. You know, be interesting to see why, you know, why they might have felt that way, or maybe it was because it could be down to the confidence. You know, it could be down to a lack of confidence, and maybe knowing that other male counterparts were going for that job and maybe less confident to go for themselves. Do you think this is one that it does annoy me, and I've come across it a lot? Do you think you undertake more promotional tasks, non-promotional tasks, as like such organising meetings, you know, getting the stuff in the printers, you know, getting all those things, doing all those kind of admin works over the men in your office? And again, it was a very high percentage of people that felt yes, that they, or, you know, women in their office or working places were maybe more burdened with those kind of tasks than the men in their office. Now, I suppose my own, I don't know what advice maybe you guys have for that, but I'm always the one who will point out who hasn't volunteered to do stuff and make sure that then you know, do it to the same level as the women, you know. So maybe we need to do that more for each other, you know, and point out and say, no, actually, do you know what, Rebecca, you've already, you know, volunteered yourself 5 times this week, maybe let whoever else do something instead. So I don't know if you guys have any experience in that area.
I would say from my perspective, it depends on the scale of the organisation. If you've got to all muck in a small company, and I think yes, not one person should take the weight in any way, shape or form. I think as someone who works in developing projects as a project manager and generally quite likes to be in control of what needs to be done, I would say I'm one of those people who would rather do it myself, which is a really, really bad thing. And obviously that only gets worse when you work for yourself as well. But I think it's about upskilling yourself, recognizing that we all have strengths, but we also all have weaknesses. And sometimes it might be that we don't like doing a job particularly, but part of that might just be because we don't think it plays to our strengths and we don't want to seem bad. I don't know. I mean, it could be that there's some others in the office who really would like to be responsible for event management, but just feel a bit terrified about it. So maybe there's some kind of, I don't know, shadowing to be done and kind of mentoring support that could be provided. And that's something that we do a lot of in the District Heat and Divas, actually, is the mentoring side of things, which I can touch on later. But
great, thanks, Ellie. So this question, have you ever had a woman as your manager during your career in the energy sector? So actually I was surprised at this. So actually more people have had women as managers. So I have to make sure I get the word right. A woman as a manager in their career, which is very interesting. And then there's been lots of really good insight into, so that's the last question that we posed then was, apart from technical ability and skill, why do you think it's important to have diversity of gender in the energy sector? So a lot of it, you know, I suppose gender is, I suppose, one aspect of diversity that adds to, I suppose, comes back to what you were talking about earlier, Tanya, you know, and having, you know, diversity makes sense. You know, you have that kind of diversity of backgrounds, diversity of gender, of color, and you know, it's all of those things that will bring, everybody kind of agreed that would is the main benefit. So it's a benefit to business to have that diversity there, and I think we got some really good feedback on those. So that, a combat group think was a good one as well. So, that you're not having all the same type of people in the room, thinking in the very much the same way. So yeah, there's been great, and thanks to everybody, I suppose, that took the time to fill out this survey. We will circulate the results to everybody so that you can see them yourselves. And I think it's a great way for us now with the Women in Energy group going forward, that we can kind of use those answers and those results to inform, I suppose, our next events coming up. And I suppose before, we will do two kind of questions at the end, a live poll for the audience, just to gauge what you would like to see coming up in our next events. But before we go to that, Ellie, I'd like to kind of draw on, I suppose, for this group, I suppose this is a kind of a first collaboration between REI and SEAI's Women in Energy kind of supports that they've both been working on. And we kind of want to plan ahead for the next year and see what we can do. From your experience working with the Divas in the UK, what are the, I suppose, is there any specific success factors that you think we could replicate here?
Yeah, so I guess just to kind of give everyone a quick kind of summary, the district heating Divas was set up by a fantastic lady called Rachel Mills, who is herself a very kind of passionate kind of worker in the energy and sustainability sector, but from a kind of event and marketing and kind of communications perspective. And I think her and a number of ladies decided that actually it would be quite nice to have a forum where they could come and talk in a safe space. And from there, it has absolutely grown like wildfire. It really has. And I think just trying to reflecting on what's been probably 2 years of the Divas going, which started off as being a kind of breakfast meetup in London, which I did make once, but it meant getting a 5:30 train, which I wasn't that chuffed with. So that's one of the reasons why I then set up with kind of agreement, a kind of Midlands-based group, and we've got a Northern-based group and a Scotland-based group and a South-West group, but we actually all come together as well. And I would say there is absolutely no restriction anyone else participating in that. It's just a free kind of forum to get involved in. But some of the success factors, I guess, I would say we've got, well, firstly, it's an open and safe space, and I think I had not recognized the freedom of actually being in a room of just women before, or a virtual room. And I think I'd never really perceived, as I've kind of suggested in the kind of experience I've shared, a major issue with being female in my sector before. And either I'm very hard-skinned and haven't noticed it, or for me, it hasn't existed or presented itself in quite the same way. But actually, I found it very refreshing to come into that group in whatever form that looks like. But I would say what we have done, yes, we do have kind of regional groupings, but we do come together to try and help cross-fertilise a bit more across our groups as well. But we've also got some fixed things that we do. And then there are other things which are quite kind of evolve as they need to. So, for example, we've had a very, very successful mentoring program, which doesn't exclude men at all from this. And I think it is really important, kind of what Tanya mentioned around, it's not just about us versus them or them versus us. It's very much about building that rapport and ensuring that some of those kind of historic stereotypes or ones that still exist really are kind of dispelled. So we've got this very successful mentoring program, and I'm actually involved as both a mentor and as a mentee, because I want to continually grow and improve my own knowledge and my own approach to things, and I want to learn from others. So that's been fantastic, and it's got a simple structure to it and a simple kind of set of rules as to how we work with our mentors and mentees. But fundamentally, it's up to the individuals to kind of make that arrangement and decide what they want to get out of it. So that's been really, really successful. And I think that is something which we're in the second year of and has been further extended to allow more people to get involved. And I think it's not about pairing someone early in their career with someone older in their career, or someone on a subject matter. It's kind of how the pairings in terms of what you want to achieve out of it best work. And I haven't been involved in the pairing process, but as far as I can tell, it's been hugely successful every time. So that's been really great. And I think the kind of other aspect, which has been less formal, has been the kind of the meeting. So we meet on a monthly basis for just basically an hour in the morning, usually first thing, so it doesn't interfere too much with the day. And I think there's been a balance of structured discussion and then non-structured, just let it all go, kind of, in terms of what are the frustrations, what are the things you're having trouble with, are there any kind of questions that we can kind of help share and support. And I think actually that has been particularly, I mean, district heating is hugely complex, but obviously all aspects of the energy system are. So I think for those who are very experienced but are coming into this from a very different perspective, it's been really would consider a stupid question, which often people say, this may be a stupid question. It's like, no, nothing's a stupid question. Don't say that. But effectively, it does give people a platform to feel a bit more comfortable. And I think the regional meetings have been particularly good for that, because it tends to be no more than about 10 people. Obviously, the people kind of change each month, and there's no fixed requirement for you to attend. But I think a balance of a free kind of opportunity to discuss and kind of moan or whatever it is you want to do, and kind of some discussion topic can be helpful. And then we have these kind of national events, and we've done different sorts of things. And one of the people that I brought to a national event was a psychologist, actually, because I recognised from a personal level that obviously the last couple of years have been particularly challenging, with all of us working so much in isolation. And I felt it would be good to have something to kind of pull us out of that mire into a more positive way of looking at things. And we arranged this lady to come and speak to us, who was absolutely fantastic. But we've done other things on very, very sector specific. So I think what I'm saying is it's good to recognise the outside of the core day-to-day work and jobs that we do, the other things we need to support ourselves. And I think that's been a strength of the Divas, is the fact that we've recognised that it's not just about knowledge sharing and networking. It is also about mental health awareness. Yeah. It's about other skills, and I think because we've all come together in this kind of safe way, it allows us to explore that in quite an open and safe way as well. So a bit of structure and a bit of flexibility, I think, is important in these forums. That's
what I think that really attracted me to the District Heating Divas conference last year, was that kind of change of format. So it wasn't all just presentation. Now, obviously there was technical content about the sector itself, but that it was dotted with the personal development, mental health stuff in between. You had comedians involved and all those other bits and pieces, which is just a much nicer format, just a much more refreshing format for something like that, especially when it's online as well. And it's great, and that pushes us nicely onto our polls, which we have 2 minutes to complete there before we wrap up, which is great. So Katie, in the background, if you wouldn't mind pressing go on our first poll. So this question is, what type of events would you prefer to see over the next few months from the Women in Energy group? So inspiring talks from women in the energy sector about the career path, much like today. So different discussions, much like today's. Workshops focusing on specific skills, personal development. Online talks, workshops on how to support diversity in the Irish energy sector, or discussions and talks from women on major energy sector policy and issues. And you can select more than one, so select as many as you think you would be interested in, and we'll leave that for 1 minute and let people, because there's over 100 people on, so it might take a bit of time to get all the answers in. But yeah, I suppose a lot of the things, Ellie, that you've actually said, we have in our next question as well, a poll question around what kind of about those kind of mentoring. Would people like to see a mentoring program, and what kind of other things we could do in Energy Ireland. I was actually thinking as well, should because you were talking about there about the it's important to have the men involved. I wonder, calling it women in energy or women in anything is probably it should be gender balance in Energy Ireland or something like that, where it would be less, I suppose, maybe more inviting for women or for men to be involved as well, potentially. I don't know. So the results are in. So there's interest in everything, which is great. And the most, so the discussions and talks with women on major energy sector policies and issues, and the workshops on specific skills and personal development are the two most popular answers there, but interest in everything, which is great. So we're going to keep obviously all these results, and we'll bring them to our next question. And then Kate, just the last question there. So if you can select your answer from the options there. So what would interest you most? Social or networking events within COVID guidelines, of course. A mentoring program, these kind of monthly virtual kind of couples or chats online, and that could be broken into regional sector groups if you're going to do them in person, etc. All of the above or none of the above. And if you have any other suggestions, please do put them in the chat box because we will collect those. And sorry to Tanya and Ellie, these aren't open. This question, the polls aren't open to panelists, but I'll get your input later on. So we'll leave that for a couple of minutes just to let people answer that. Thanks to Katie, who's doing all this great work in the background.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
Donna, can I just say while you're finalising that, I have to move to another call, but I just
no problem, Tanya. No problem.
Say thank you so much for the opportunity. And Ellie, it's been fascinating to hear about your work and the Divas. I think this is something I really want to get to understand better. So I'm looking forward to spending some time figuring that out. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks a million for taking the time to be with us today. I know you're very busy.
Not at all. My pleasure.
Great to have you. Thank you.
Thanks a million, folks. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you. Thanks.
So the results of this poll are in then, all of the above. So most people, 50% of people are interested in all of the above, which is great. But actually, interestingly, the second most interesting is the mentoring program, which I think will definitely be taken on board then for our next events. So thank you very much to Ellie and to Tanya for being with us today. It's been really interesting. I mean, we could have talked for, I'd say, Ellie, for another hour on all this stuff, but obviously we had to close it at some stage. So please do, anybody who's on the call, please do join the LinkedIn page, the SEAI's Women in Energy LinkedIn page, and sign up to the Women in Energy directory, which is on the Renewable Energy Ireland site. We've just launched a survey for anybody who is in the Dublin region. We are doing a survey for Dublin Climate Action Week that we would really like you to complete for us if possible. It's about moving Dublin towards a zero carbon future, and we really would like your input. And my colleague Katie will put the link to that into the chat box right now. And there are more events on the calendar. There's another one tomorrow, an Ask the Expert event on tomorrow, Saturday at 10 o'clock. So if you're going to have that, you can watch that over your cup of coffee in the morning. And hopefully no hangovers. And on Sunday then we have a walk-in tour of a sustainable energy community on Sunday at 2 o'clock. So please do check out the Climate Action, the Dublin Climate Action Week website to sign up. So that's dublinclimateactionweek.ie. So thanks again to everybody, to SEAI, to Julie, to Patricia, and to Justin from REI, all the help in the background, to Katie and Suzanne, my colleagues in Codema. Big thanks to Ellie and Tanya for joining us today. It's been absolutely great to get to you again soon.
Very happy to. Thanks again.
Thanks a million. Thanks, guys.